Hello, my name is Alexandre Ribeiro. I'm a researcher at INESCTEC from Portugal, and I will present TLS-Covid19, a new annotated corpus for timeline summarization. This is a joint work with Pasquali from INESCTEC and Citizen Lab, Ricardo Campos, professor of the Polytechnic of Tomar and researcher at INESCTEC, Brenda Santana, researcher at Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul, Alípio Jorge, professor of the University of Porto and researcher at INESCTEC, and Adam Jatowt, professor of the University of Innsbruck. This is the agenda for today's presentation. We will start by talking about the usefulness of timelines and the task of timeline summarization. Then we detail about the TLS-Covid19 dataset and the timeline summarization experiments performed on the corpus. Finally, we approach possible future work to improve and make use of the dataset. A timeline is a method to organize a complex event and tell a story. Manually building such timelines can be very laborious and time-consuming, and thus the need for automatic methods to generate timelines. Timeline summarization aims to automatically identify key dates of major events and provide short descriptions of what happened on those dates. In the figure, we can see the contrast between a set of documents returned by a Google search for TikTok news and a timeline highlighting the most relevant events of the TikTok history. While reading daily news from platforms such as Google is very useful to get recent information and to get familiarized with hot topics in a short amount of time, getting an overview of a topic over time requires other types of frameworks, such as timelines, especially in a time where users feel overwhelmed with so much information. The problem of summarizing texts and events has been widely addressed in the last couple of years. Single document summarization aims to represent the content of a single document either through its most important sentences, known as extractive summarization, or by a process through which new sentences may be generated, known as abstractive summarization. While single documents may be used as a source to create a summary, most of the researchers consider instead a diversified number of texts. This research area, known as multi-document summarization, has received much attention in the past and can be divided into two main lines of research. One, generic multi-document summarization approaches, which do not require a query to extract relevant textual units from the documents, and two, query-focused multi-document summarization, which takes into account an input query to automatically generate an event summary text. Timeline summarization can be defined as a subtask of multi-document summarization, conceived to highlight the most important information during the development of a story over time by summarizing long-lasting events in a timely ordered fashion. The general idea is to extract textual units from related batch documents over time through a retrospective perspective. In this case, the temporal dimension plays an important role, and documents are assumed to be time-tagged or to have at least some inherent, possibly ambiguous, temporal information in a way that text can be anchored in a timeline. Unlike multi-document summarization, which only considers the compression rate between the input documents and the reference summaries, in TLS, timeline summarization, one is required to find not only relevant information, but also relevant dates to be placed in a timeline. Catizon et al. Formalizes this process as follows. First, relevant documents should be included in the appropriate time frame. Then, each timeline unit should contain accurate text labels. And finally, the timeline should include the most significant events of the document collection. Unlike timeline summarization, which follows an holistic overview approach on top of a batch of documents, update summarization focuses on producing intermediate summaries to be updated over time as new information emerges. That is, ongoing events are summarized over time as a real-time problem. The rationale is that for some particular events, such as natural disasters, the user's information needs to be changed over time. The task of timeline summarization requires a set of documents from which the timeline is predicted, and a ground truth timeline used to compare with the predicted timeline and evaluate the performance of the models. Some common practices for building a ground truth timeline for timeline summarization tasks include Using timeline pages from the Wikipedia, we can see an example in the figure, using timelines manually written by journalists, and more recently, using live blogs. The COVID-19 pandemic originated an enormous amount of news articles. These charts show the percentage of COVID-19 related news articles during the year of 2020, which is the date range considered in our corpus. On the left-hand side, the coverage of the English media, and on the right-hand side, the coverage of Portuguese news sources. We can see that by the end of the previous year, COVID-19 was mentioned in approximately 1/3 of the news stories. We frame our work as a union of ideas from these previous works: a live blog corpus for summarization, a dataset built from live blogs, and the COVID-19 Open Research Dataset, a reference dataset of scientific papers on COVID-19. So, why use live blogs to create a timeline summarization dataset? A live blog is a web page where media outlets offer a daily live coverage about an ongoing event. These blogs contain two key components: a set of regular news stories, which can be seen inside the green box, and a summary, also known as key moments, depicted inside the red box, where the most important news are highlighted. We use these summaries as the ground truth timelines. This is another example of a live blog. These key moments are selected by journalists, thus ensuring their quality. Live blogs may differ in format or layout, but the concept is always the same: a feed with updated stories and a set of key moments. With this work, we aim to provide a multilingual news collection ready for timeline summarization, follow standards from previous work in the field, provide an open source pipeline to collect the data, process it, and compute the timeline summarization baselines, and encourage further research. Our corpus is built using the live blogs of 4 news sources: CNN and The Guardian for the English language, and Público and Observador for Portuguese. We use the regular news stories as input documents to generate timelines, and the key moments as the ground truth timelines. A detailed description of the dataset and the scripts to reproduce it are open source and available in GitHub in the following URL. Please feel free to contact us if the script doesn't work. TLS-Covid19 follows the same structure as previous works in the field, such as Timeline 17 and Crisis datasets. We also provide the data in JSON format. For each topic, we provide a set of input documents grouped by dates. Each date contains one or more files. Each file corresponds to one input document. For each topic, we provide a ground truth timeline in the form of a single file containing the key moments grouped by dates. Here, we can see an example of the timeline of a topic. A timeline is a single file containing a set of news articles grouped by dates. We collected the corpus by web scraping live blogs. We performed some data pre-processing by removing news duplicates and cleaning noise from the text. The topics were selected using a semi-supervised approach. We performed entity recognition using Spacy and keyword extraction with Yake, a software developed by our team. Then each topic had to comply with 2 requirements. Each requirement was applied for both sources for each language. Each topic must be mentioned in at least 5 key moments. This requirement removes topics with low temporal coverage. The number of occurrences in key moments should not exceed 50% of occurrences in news articles. This requirement ignores candidates that appear too often. Finally, we did some manual curation by inspecting all candidates and merging overlapping topics. This figure shows the word clouds of the selected topics. On the left-hand side, the English word cloud, and on the right-hand side, the Portuguese word cloud. We can see that topics have different sizes. The more frequently a topic occurs in the ground truth timelines, the bigger it is in the word clouds. Some topics, such as China and Boris Johnson, occur in both collections. Our corpus has a total of 178 topics. 35 in the English collection, and 143 in the Portuguese subset. Here, we can see the distribution of topics by type in each language. There are 30 topics that are common in both collections. In this table, we can see the corpus statistics by language. English news sources tend to use longer news articles but shorter key moments when compared to the Portuguese ones. This is shown by the average number of sentences in input talks and ground truth. Regarding the input documents, the average number of sentences and average number of dates take into account the average among all topics. Looking at the compression rates, we can tell how difficult it can be to identify the correct sentences and dates. For instance, in terms of identifying important dates, English sources cover nearly 135 dates, while the average number of dates present in each topic timeline is 21.47. This means that if we randomly select a date, we have 15.89% of chance of selecting the correct date. The sentence compression rate shows how difficult it will be to select the correct sentence. In the English collection, we have 0.76% of chance of identifying the correct sentence using random selection. This table gives us a more detailed view of the dataset statistics by news source. CNN publishes the longest news articles and thus is responsible for the increasing of the length of the input documents in the English collection. Portuguese news sources, and in particular Observador, use considerably longer key moments when compared to the English ones. Each source writes between 1 and 2 sentences for each key moment. In this table, we compare our dataset with previous work. Timeline 17 proposed a method that links news articles with already existing timelines edited by journalists as reference summaries. The authors selected 17 of such timelines from 9 different topics published by 6 different news agencies, including CNN and BBC. Considering these topics as queries, they used Google search engine to retrieve the top 400 articles published in the same time span as the original timeline. The methodology behind Crisis is similar to the methodology of Timeline 17. Authors built a new and larger dataset focused on long time span stories on armed conflicts such as the Egypt Revolution, Syria War, Yemen Crisis, and Libya War. The dataset comprises 25 manually constructed timelines extracted from 24 news agencies, obtained from January 2011 to July 2013. Social timeline includes news stories and their respective user comments. Similar to other works, the authors crawled articles from news providers. The timeline dataset comprises news articles and comments collected from CNN, BBC, and the New York Times on 4 topics: the missing Malaysia Airlines flight MH370, the political crisis in Ukraine, the Israel-Gaza conflict, and the NSA surveillance leaks. Authors provide 6 timelines as ground truth based on the respective Wikipedia entries for each topic. Chen 2019 is a Chinese dataset based on a Chinese encyclopedia specially designed for abstractive timeline summarization. The dataset consists of timelines about celebrities from different countries. Each celebrity's entry in the encyclopedia contains a biographical timeline summary and a larger section detailing their experiences. In the experiences section, each event is a paragraph with an explanation and details, which is selected as an input article. Entities is a recent dataset with 47 timelines extracted from CNN Fast 8, a CNN directory containing a large list of curated timeline articles. Authors selected mainly timeline articles about personalities as ground truth. For each timeline, the authors defined a set of key phrases as queries. They collected the input articles using the Guardian's API. In this paper, we propose a dataset on a timely subject and relevant task that does not only addresses English, but also a low-resource language such as Portuguese. The current version of TLS-Covid19 consists of 178 topics, 35 in English and 143 in Portuguese, covering a time period from January 2020 to December 2020. For each topic, there is a number of related news articles and the corresponding ground truth timeline. For the experiments in timeline summarization, we use TILS, an open source toolkit for timeline summarization baselines and evaluation. As the evaluation metric, we use Rouge, a package for automatic evaluation of summaries. We applied two methods to automatically extract baseline timelines: random as the lower bound and worst case scenario, and TLS Oracle as the upper bound best case scenario. We use Rouge as a base metric for evaluation, specifically Rouge 1 and Rouge 2. Rouge 1 considers the unigram overlapping between the system and reference timelines. Rouge 2 considers the bigram overlapping between the system and the reference timelines. It is important to notice that Rouge does not take into consideration temporal aspects. Although the original Rouge does not take into account temporal aspects, it can be extended to support such constraints. Two possible metrics are concatenation. The simplest one is plain old Rouge. It simply considers all predicted content as one single text. It doesn't take into consideration correct dates. And date agreement, that for each predicted date evaluates predicted content against an exact date match in the ground truth. We use two methods to automatically extract baseline timelines. Random is the lower bound baseline, a naive method representing the worst case scenario. TLS Oracle is the upper bound baseline, an optimistic method representing the best case scenario. Here, we present the results of the described baseline methods for timeline generation in the English collection. The figure shows the precision, recall, and F1 scores for each method using the Rouge 2 metric. Again, Rouge 2 considers the bigram overlapping between the predicted and reference timelines. And these are the results for the Portuguese subset. We can see that the methods perform similar in both collections. As it would be expected, there is a significant difference between the random and the Oracle results. This gap shows that there is room for researchers to play with their algorithms. As future work, we and the community can keep updating the corpus with more new stories, more topics, and possibly more new sources and languages. We also want to try new timeline summarization baselines and develop applications using the corpus. One application that we use internally at our research group is Tell Me Stories. Tell Me Stories is a research project based on EAC that allows users to automatically create news narratives in the form of timelines about any subject. The user inputs a query, and the system automatically selects the most relevant news articles and builds a timeline. I will now show a local demo of Tell Me Stories. So this is the Tell Me Stories homepage. These are the dataset topics grouped by language, here for Portuguese and here for English, and by the topics type. The user can either input a query or select one of these topics. I will search for Europe. The system is retrieving the documents and building the timeline. This is the timeline for Europe. The system built 8 temporal intervals. We can navigate through them here. And we can see that news articles have different colors. Black news articles correspond to normal live blog entries, while green news articles correspond to news articles that are present in the ground truth timeline. We can also see related terms, entities, and terms selected by EAC. We can go back to the narrative. We can flag the relevant terms selected by EAC, and they will appear here in bold. And in advanced options, the user has the option to process either the news titles or contents, select which language to use, which collection, Portuguese or English, and according to the collection, which news sources to consider. If we click on one of these headlines, we will be redirected to the original live blog post. For example, Germany confirms first human transmission of coronavirus in Europe, a key moment. I will click on this headline. and I will be redirected to the original live blog post. In this case, the Guardian live blog. Germany confirms first human transmission of coronavirus in Europe. And this news article is also present here in the ground truth timeline. We are planning in open source Tell Me Stories, and in conjunction with the TLS-Covid19 dataset, this demo can be reproduced. And this concludes the presentation. Thank you.